And I want to say thank you on behalf of three kind of groups of people here today. So some of you, in hearing Ashley's story, you went, that's my story. And maybe not all the same details and maybe not all the same things, but you just intuitively knew that because you live with depression and anxiety on a daily basis. And you've heard enough people like me who don't live with depression and don't live with anxiety talk about it, and it's like, finally, it's okay to be me. So thank you, Ashley. The others of us that I thank you on behalf are for people like me. I don't live with depression and anxiety on a daily basis, but my mother does and my sister does as well. Both of them, too, are on antidepressants, and both of those have been helpful for them. Again, as Ashley had said, you can make your decision about what it is like. It has been helpful for them. And what I thank you in sharing that story, when you first sent it to me a few weeks ago, is it helped me to understand how I can walk with them better. And really the story that we're going to look at today, that is our hope and that is the whole intention for today. If you are here and you connected with Ashley's story because that's your lived experience, I'm going to share with you a story of a man within the Bible who had a mental health crisis, and you're going to see many of the similar patterns that Ashley, and the similar living well in the midst of the journey. We're also going to see how God comes alongside. And for those of us who have close family members or friends or children or parents who wrestle with and live with anxiety and depression, as we see the way God comes alongside this young man, it's my hope that for those of us in that place, that we too will be able to learn what is helpful and what isn't. And the third group of us, and I think this is probably the smallest of all of us here, we are maybe the fortunate few that know nobody who wrestles and lives with depression or anxiety and do not live with that ourselves. But I promise you, Ashley, that every one of us, even if we were in that group, we're filled with a heart of compassion. We want to come alongside and support you and walk with you. And so all of us are in this place where we desire to find hope for the walking wounded. And this is the series that we're in. We started it last week when Brett was here. It's the second Sunday. If you have not heard Brett's talk, it is up online, and I would challenge you to take some time and space to listen to what he had to say. He too shared his story and his journey with depression and anxiety. But let me clarify, before we move into our topic for today, the goals of this series. And the first is that we desire to bring hope. There is hope to be found. If at the end of this series, if you come to me and you say, Pastor, I was living with depression and anxiety before this series started, and I am still living with depression and anxiety. I have not found any healing. Healing has not happened. We are going to lament that together, but I want to be clear, that is not the goal. Jesus may or may not bring healing in these next 5 weeks, but if you come to me at the end of these 6 weeks and you say, I am not living with greater hope in the midst of my depression and my anxiety, or walking with someone who is, then I have failed and we have failed. And we need to go back to the drawing board and we need to try again. The express goal is to bring hope for the walking wounded. Everyone, if you are here today and you struggle and you live with depression and anxiety, it probably took every bit of energy for you to just simply walk through these doors today. For the last 3 weeks, Ashley has introduced this topic on a Sunday morning, and as we hear her story, imagine the courage, imagine what it has taken for her to stand up here and to just try to open up this conversation for us. We are all walking. And we are all walking wounded. And for the next 5 weeks, we're going to look specifically at 2 wounds: depression and anxiety. Now, there are many other mental illnesses that we could talk about, and maybe we will in the future. And there are many other wounds that, that we as human beings carry. But for the next 2 weeks, and for the reasons that I began with, that you maybe battle, that you maybe live with depression and anxiety, that you walk with somebody, or you're filled with compassion, for the next 3 weeks, or the next 5 weeks, we are going to look specifically at depression and anxiety. And where's the hope for the walking wounded? And the question that you may ask, the question that I asked when Ashley and Andrea came to me about a year ago, over a year ago, is where do we start? And the place that we have decided to start, and the place that we're going to continue through, and the reason that I asked Ashley to share her story, is we are going to start with stories. With stories. Last week, and the reason I encourage you to watch Brett's talk if you haven't watched it already, is because he shares his story. Ashley has shared her story with us. And the place I want to begin, and what we're going to look at today, is with this question: what if there was a story that we could look at where God engaged a human being in the midst of a mental health crisis? What if there was a place that we could go and we could say, I don't know why things happen, and all in the midst of the confusion, but what if there was a story within the Scriptures that we could hold on to and maybe find some direction in the midst of that darkness, in the midst of that swimming underwater? What if Ashley, and those of you who connected with Ashley's story, what if after 6 weeks you could have a more clear understanding of what are the things that I'm responsible for in life, and what are those things that God says, I got it. I got it. What if there was a story for those like me who walk with a mother and a sister who battle with depression and anxiety? If I could learn from the way that God engages with a human being, I could try to pattern my actions after His. And today I want to share with you that there is just such a story. The main character in this story, other than God, is a man by the name of Elijah. And a little bit of the backstory, we don't have time to read through the entire story, but where we're going to meet Elijah today is after Elijah has had an incredible victory. For 3.5 years, it has not rained on the land. And God came to Elijah and said, Elijah, you're the one who's going to make it rain again. And he goes and he gathers the people, and they have this big showdown on the top of a place of Mount Carmel. And God has brings this incredible victory through Elijah. And he's just filled with so much joy that if you read in the chapter that before the one we get to today, we're told that he outruns a chariot. That is how much joy and excitement that he feels. He's defeated his enemies. And the place that we pick up the story in 1 Kings 19 is that his enemies, the leaders of the people who lost, are not very happy. Ahab was on the mountain with Elijah. And Ahab was in the chariot that Elijah ran faster, and Ahab goes home. He is the evil king, and Jezebel is the evil queen in the story. And he goes home, and Ahab tells Jezebel everything that Elijah has done, including the way that Elijah had killed all the prophets of the Baals. Now, for us as 21st century listeners, when we hear about somebody killing other human beings, right away our defenses go up, and our 21st century judgments, we begin to pass judgment and go, whoa, I'm not sure about this violence and killing and all that. And you know what? Those are great conversations to have, but I'm going to invite you to just set those aside for now. Please don't take our 21st century context and pass judgment upon this story. Ahab goes home. Well, the part that we need to see is Ahab goes home and tells Jezebel what happened, and Jezebel sends a message to Elijah, and she says this: "May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just the way that you have killed them." She issues a threat, and it's in this place where Elijah begins to experience a mental health crisis. And when we continue moving into the story, we see that core emotion that goes along with, which underpins depression and anxiety, and that is fear. Elijah was afraid. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid. It's just an emotion that wells up within us. In fact, it's a real gift. When your child is running, when Adrian has a ball and he runs out into the midst of the street, that same fear that may keep you in bed in the morning is going to cause you to not think, "Oh, maybe I should run after him." And no, you're just going to run and you're going to grab him, you're going to bring him back. That emotion of fear always causes us to do one of three things: to fight, to flee, or to freeze. And Elijah chooses to flee. Elijah is afraid and he flees for his life. God just brought this amazing victory, but he flees for his life. He heads to Beersheba, we're told. It's a day's journey away, a town in Judah. And then he does what happens often for those of us who live with depression and anxiety. We put walls up and we don't allow those who are closest of us to come in. We abandon those who want to help us. He leaves his servant there. Then we're told he went on alone into the wilderness. He traveled another day into the desert. He sat down under a solitary broom tree, and it's just a stick with leaves. It's not a big maple tree with shade. It's just a stick, and he prays that he might die. He prays that he might die. And it's as we look at his prayer and dissect that prayer that we see that he's experiencing both depression and anxiety. A clinical definition of depression is a persistent feeling of sadness or a persistent lack of interest in the day-to-day things of life. Ashley gave some great descriptors in her talk. It's an unwanted darkness that won't go away. Elijah says, "I have had enough, Lord. I have had enough." He is profoundly disinterested in life. He is depressed. And he gives that common response. He says, "Take my life." And one of the things that we're going to do over the next 5 weeks is we're going to talk about some of those things that go on in our world that we all know about but never talk about. Elijah is not suicidal in this moment. He is asking someone else to take his life. But the reality is sometimes depression and anxiety can get so bad that we can desire to take our own life. Now, a couple of things that I want you to forever remove from your vocabulary. I'm going to say this a few times over the next 6 weeks. People don't commit suicide. That sounds like they are committing a crime. The language that we use is that people die by suicide. And the reason for that is suicide is that horrible choice that people make because they don't want to feel the pain anymore. If God, as we're going to see in just a moment, if God met Elijah, if there is a place where time after time that just, I don't want to live anymore, the pain is too much, then people die by suicide. And another one of the myths that I want to dispel is some of you are thinking, Pastor, you shouldn't be talking about this because then that's going to give people the idea of dying by suicide. And what you're going to learn if you're here on Tuesday, September the 25th, is that the exact opposite is true. When we talk and when we bring from the dark into the light the realities of the world that we live in, and the realities that sometimes the pain is so great that we don't want to live anymore, we give an opportunity for people to talk about that. And what I want to say is, if you are here today and the depression and the anxiety is just so overwhelming, we are blessed today with a potluck downstairs, and I'm going to linger upstairs until the last person is done up here. And if you are here today and you're thinking, you know what, I'm considering this. Andrea is going to be at the Welcome Center after the service. You can talk to her or you can talk to me after. Come and talk to me. And if you are here today and you're going, wow, this is a conversation that I've never had before, I would like to learn how I can walk with people that are experiencing depression and anxiety to such an extent that they may be considering suicide. Tuesday, September 25th, here at the church, we're going to do something called Safe Talk. Safe Talk, and it's going to help us to learn what we can do. Now back to our story. Elijah's depressed. And he says, take my life. Why? Because I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. The clinical definition of anxiety is that it is an emotion with the feelings of tension or worried wrapped into it. Sometimes anxiety can be so overwhelming that it can be accompanied with chest pains. We have what's called anxiety attacks or panic attacks. It feels like a heart attack. Some of you have experienced this. Anxiety also has these reoccurring thoughts that keep moving around, and the response is almost always that we want to avoid certain situations in life because of the worry, the anxiety. Elijah is experiencing both depression and anxiety. And for the rest of our time, what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. We're going to look at how Elijah walks. If I say Isaiah, I mean Elijah. We're going to look at how Elijah walks, because he walks well while living with depression and anxiety. If you are here and when Ashley was talking about her own experience, I'd invite you to just focus almost solely on the actions of Elijah and see what he does and the steps that he takes and the hope that is brought into his life. If you're here today and you're like me, have a family member or a close friend who has depression or anxiety, or if you just were filled with compassion, then I want you to focus on what God does in coming alongside Elijah, because God just nails it out of the park in terms of how to walk alongside someone living with depression and anxiety. And the first thing that we see in the story is that after Elijah tells the truth, after Elijah shares what is going on in his life, then he lays down under the bush and he falls asleep. And if you have depression or you talk to anybody with depression, one of the hardest things to do is sleep. One of the terms that Brett started with last week and that I'm going to say over and over again in the next 5 weeks is moving things from the dark into the light. What Ashley did today is took a part of her life that was in the dark and she moved it into the light. And all of us now have a greater opportunity for hope for the walking wounded. And Ashley, it is my belief that you are going to sleep better this evening because of what you have done. Elijah moves what he is thinking and feeling from the darkness into the light. And if you have never done that, please hear me. I'm not going to ask you to come and do what Ashley did. If you have never shared with somebody, if you are in the place where Ashley was when she was at Redeemer, finally taking that first step of going to somebody and saying, this is what I think, this is what I feel, this is what my life is like, the promise and the hope is that you too can then lay down and you can sleep and find rest, maybe like you've never found before. But the story doesn't end there. The story continues. It's as Elijah is resting, all at once an angel touches him. All at once a messenger of God comes and touches Elijah on the shoulder and says this, Elijah, I want to tell you all the reasons why you should be happy, because you just had a great victory. No, he doesn't. Elijah, you're my prophet, and you talk to me, and I talk to you, and you're privileged. You should be happy, not depressed and anxious. No, he doesn't. There's no fixing, there's no manipulation, there is no trying to explain what's going on. In fact, God only says 4 words, and that is to explain what he wants and what he's done for Elijah. Get up and eat. And then Elijah looks around and he sees that he is not the one that needs to make the food. God has come alongside and baked him a loaf of bread on hot coals and given him a jar of water, and Elijah eats it and drinks it and then sleeps again. And if you are here today walking with somebody who lives with depression and anxiety, I'm going to challenge you and invite you to stop trying to explain to them why they should be happy, and stop trying to tell them all the things that they already know, and stop doing everything until you have created a safe space for them, and until you have made their favorite meal and made it again and made it again, and until they are able to rest. The first thing that God does when he comes alongside Elijah in his mental health crisis is he creates a safe place for him to eat, or he creates a meal for him, and then he allows him to sleep. Some of you who are living with depression and anxiety are so tired from the journey. You've been spending years and decades just putting the mask up. And if you are married to that individual, or if you are the close friend of that individual that comes to you today and says, you know, when Ashley was telling that story, that's me. Here's how I'm going to ask you to respond. What can I cook you? In fact, if you're a close friend, you probably already know. You probably already know the food they like. And you can go, I'm going to cook you this meal. And if you can't cook them the meal, we have a church full of cooks. And call them on the phone and say, I need you to cook this meal. Or pick up the vacuum cleaner. Or do the laundry. Or whatever it is that needs to be done. Eat and sleep. And I'm convinced that if this story happened in the 21st century, that God would have also given a treadmill. But that's just a little aside. Eat, sleep, and exercise. And I was tempted to just leave this talk there, but because the danger is that we're going to move beyond these practical ways that we can help in terms of creating this space and eating. But I decided not, because just how God comes alongside Elijah is just so profound that we need to, I think it's helpful to see this entire story. When we continue reading in the story, the angel of the Lord came back a second time, and this time gives advice, and this time tries to fix Elijah. Nope, doesn't do it that time either. He touches him and says, get up and eat again. Again. Making a meal and creating that safe place is not a one-shot deal. If you want to help, this is how you can help. And then God acknowledges. And here, if you are in the place of Ashley or Elijah today, this next part is for you. God acknowledges that the journey is really hard. Is really hard. I would love to be able to stand up here and say, you know what, in 6 weeks you're going to be healed. I would love to be able to do that, but it's not true. You know, one of the things I'm most excited about is that at the end of our series on October the 14th, Pastor Andrew Zanting is going to be up here and he's going to be speaking. He's going to be finishing off the series. And there's two things that I want you to know about Pastor Andrew Zanting. He's preached here a couple of times. He's the guy that has preached when I'm away. Two things I want you to know about Pastor Andrew this morning. He has an amazing ministry around healing and deliverance. He is somebody who has prayed for healing. There was an individual in my home this year that was healed of cancer. I was there. You may not believe me. You could talk to me about it after. Was healed of cancer in my home earlier this year. There's an amazing ministry around that. And for 7 years, he lived with deep depression and deep anxiety. Both of those are true. Both of those are true. And at the end, he's going to finish up that series. God comes to Elijah, and I come to you today and say, you know what? Chances are the journey is going to be really difficult. And this is why those who are walking with you, once they create that safe space and do the laundry and the dishes and all, and your strength is regained and you have some rest and you eat and you drink and you get up and you take that next step, the step is going to be a lot like Elijah's, where Elijah is strengthened by the food and he travels 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Horeb, the mountain of God. And if you know anything about the Bible, you know that 40 days and 40 nights is a key term. Noah spent 40 days in the ark where it rained. Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights being tempted in the desert. And Elijah walked each one of those days alone. There's no indication. In fact, as we continue in the story, we realize that Elijah walked every step alone. He goes into the cave. He spends the night. After he has eaten and sleep, and God has provided that space and for us exercise, the challenge that I have for you is to take the next lonely step. One of the realities of depression and anxiety, and if you want to talk with Ashley more about that, and if you're living this, you know that you walk this journey alone. Yes, there are people that walk with you, and if you don't have a community, and this is what Andrew's going to talk about, it's deeply difficult. But the truth of the matter is, the journey is hard, and you need to take the steps. But here's the part that I was convinced we can't stop here, because when Elijah moves into the cave, the word of the Lord comes to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? God asks Elijah a question that he already knows the answer to. He asks him an open-ended question. He comes to him and says, Elijah, I know that you had shared with me some things in your prayer, but Elijah, how are you doing? Elijah, share with me some of the journey. Elijah, how is your day going today? He asks an open-ended question. And what I want to say is that if you are walking alongside someone, if you're walking alongside an Elijah, if you make them some food that they love and you put it before them, even if they don't want to eat it, and you ask them the question, how are you doing today? Help me. Help me understand. How is life for you today? This is probably the answer you're going to get. He replied, I've been zealous before the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, put the prophets to death with a sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Elijah is given the freedom to express what he is thinking and he is feeling. And it's because of that open-ended question from God. It's because God has not given him advice and told him what he should do or shouldn't do or any of those pieces. It's because God has simply created space and rest and acknowledged that the journey is difficult. But then Elijah is able to give an honest answer. And if you are in that Elijah space today, and if you have somebody walking with you that is, you can just see they're trying to create space and they're trying to make rest for you and they're asking open-ended questions, my challenge for you is to be honest. To be honest. But here is the reason why we're not honest. And this goes back to those walking alongside with Elijah. The reason, if we are living with depression and anxiety, we will risk being honest once, maybe twice. But if that honesty is again followed by, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, this is why you should be happy, this is what is going on, we're not going to be honest again. And the reason we know this is because this isn't what God does. You know, one of the amazing things about this story that we often miss is this. In Elijah's answer, the reason that I highlighted those two lines in yellow is because Elijah is totally wrong about the information. Totally wrong. He says, all the people of Israelites have broken the covenant. And a little bit later on in the story, God's going to come back and said there's 7,000 people that haven't broken the covenant. In a few minutes, we're going to see that Elijah is not the only one left. In fact, there are 3 people that God specifically has in mind already for him to walk with him, and God doesn't correct him. God doesn't correct him. God doesn't tell him why he be thinking what he's thinking and feeling what he's feeling. He doesn't correct him. No, this is what he does. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out of this cave. I want you to continue walking. I want you to, because I am going to stand there and I am going to pass by. I am going to pass by. And friends, this is what Ashley and Andrea have done for us. It was a little over a year and a half ago, I don't remember exactly when, where Ashley heard Brett talk at a teacher's convention and went to Andrea and said, Andrea, do you think that we could talk about this in church, have a 6-part series on this? And then the two of them bravely came to me and said, we need to create space for people to meet God. And I got to tell you, I'm so overwhelmed by some of the conversations that I have had this week that some of you have already, through Brett's talk, are already experiencing healing and insight and renewed life in ways that you haven't before. Thank you. Thank you. We don't need to tell people what's wrong. We need to create space for them to meet God. And you know what? It's not our responsibility to make sure that they figure everything out. You know, God says, come out of the cave and you're going to meet me. And then there's a great and a powerful wind. It tears through the mountains, shatters the rocks. But, you know, Elijah's thinking, maybe God's here. But no, he's not there. And then there's a a powerful earthquake, but no, God's not in the earthquake. And then there's a fire, but the Lord's not in a fire. And it's confusing, and the journey is hard, and we need to continue to walk steps. And then there's a gentle whisper. And this is the part where Elijah recognizes and meets God. Just like last week, some of you, and when Brett had his talk, it's like, oh, I get it. I get it. I understand. And he comes out of the mouth of the cave and he's ready to receive from God. And then this is the place where God then gives all advice and tells him what he should do and fixes him. No, that's not what he does. God asks the same open-ended question. Elijah, tell me how you're doing. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me how your day's going. And he gets the same answer with the same wrong things. And then we get to the final step where God says, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I'm going to give you. I want you to go back the way that you came, walk those 40 days alone through the desert, and I want you to go to a different desert in Damascus. And there you're going to find 3 people. And I want you to anoint, and forgive me for butchering these names, Hazael over the king of Aram, Jehu, son of Nimshi, the king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. God never gives advice. God never tries to fix Elijah. In fact, this is the last conversation they have. Actually, he promises that I will be with you, and then sends him on the way. The last thing that God gives is a community. And it's Elijah who goes. And he finds Elisha. And he moves on into the rest of his life. And we don't know how Elijah's mental health was for the rest of his life. But in this story, we get critical steps that we can take if we are Elijah or if we are walking with an Elijah. The first step is to eat and to sleep and to exercise. And if you are depressed and you live with anxiety, these are some of the 3 of the hardest things for you to do. Enter in people walking beside. For some of you today, this is where you're at. This is the step that God is inviting you to do. It's not rocket science. It's coming alongside. How can I create that safe place for you? Maybe you have that safe environment. But maybe you've never shared with somebody, or maybe you haven't shared as deeply as you could. Maybe there's some things that you need to move from the dark into the light. Or maybe you need to reframe the way you talk together. If you walk alongside an Elijah, open-ended questions, no advice unless it's asked for. Or maybe you need to be a little more honest instead of just going, I'm good. I'm good. Or maybe you need to commit to be here for the next 4 weeks. And maybe wonder about a few other spaces in your week to meet God. The place I want to close is this. All the information and all the talking that I give in the next 6 weeks or 5 weeks, and all that Brett shared with us, I don't think it will make much of a difference unless you come to those 3 or 4 people that God has already put into your life, has already prepared, that can walk alongside with you. And the question, if there's none of these other steps, maybe you got to go here. The question that I hope every one of us asks today, whether we are in the place of Elijah, whether we are walking with Elijah, or whether we just have compassion for the Elijahs in our lives, is who are my own ones? And who am I? Who am I that community for? Friends, the goal is hope for the walking wounded. And I'm going to pray for us and pray for each of those steps, and then our worship team is going to lead us in a song entitled "The Poor and the Powerless." It's a new song, and the idea here is not that you sing along. If you know it and you'd like to, you can sing along. But if there was a step there, if there was a piece that was, when I was talking, if maybe you need to change the relationships that you have, maybe you need to bring some stuff from the dark and the light, whatever it is, God's Spirit will tell you. We're going to talk about that in a couple weeks. As you hear this song and the poor and the powerless, I invite you to just listen for that still small voice coming alongside and saying, this is the next step. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for the way that you came alongside Elijah. And God, I want to pray for the Elijahs in our midst. I want to pray for Ashley specifically. I want to pray that you would bless her with a clear sense of you walking with her. May that stay with her. And may she know, even in the darkest of days, that you are there with her. I pray for each one who connected deeply with her story and Elijah's story, because that is their story. That they would hear the next step that you are calling them to. And Father, for those of us who are walking alongside Elijah's, may we be as gracious and as giving and as practical as you were. Holy Spirit, allow us to hear those places where we are the poor and the powerless, and you've got others to walk with us. Or allow us to hear those places where you are calling us to walk with the poor and the powerless. Or allow us to see both. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.